Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And I'm Lauren. This month we read Defending Jacob by William Landay. It was recommended to us by Amanda on Facebook. Thanks, Amanda.
William Landay is the author of All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me, and 3 previous novels, Defending Jacob, which won the Strand Critics Award for Best Mystery Novel, The Strangler, listed as the Best Crime Novel of the Year by the LA Times, Daily Telegraph, and others, and Mission Flats, winner of the Dagger Award for Best First Crime Novel. He's also a former assistant district attorney that lives in Boston.
That makes a lot more sense now.
Since he literally had the job of the main character of this book.
Literally, no. Yeah, because I was like, oh, this is like, I wonder how much, what is it called?
Research,
yeah. How much research did he do for this? Because that was intense, some of the stuff. And I was like, oh, it clicked now. It makes sense. He literally did this for a living.
He knows it quite well.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you want to tell us a little about the book, Barbara?
Yeah. So this was originally published on January 31st of 2012, fitting our theme of reading 10-year-old plus books.
Yes.
But maybe we should fix that. Anyways, the genre is mystery, thriller, and crime. It is 421 pages and currently has a 3.99 on Goodreads, a 3.8 on Barnes & Nobles, a 4.4 on Amazon, and a 4.3 on Audible. It has been nominated for the Barry Award for Best Novel in 2013, the Hammett Prize in 2012, the Goodreads Choice Award for Mystery and Thriller, and the Goodreads Choice Award for Author in 2012. And it did win, like Michael stated, the Strand Critics Award for Best Novel in 2012. Like always, we think it's important for readers to know what, if any, representation is in the books we read. So for this book, there is no representation whatsoever. There are no POC characters, no LGBTQ plus characters, no characters with disabilities. So
nada.
Real good book there for Black History Month. Woo! Real white. Real white.
Really, really white.
Lauren, you want to tell us a little bit about the story?
Sure. So this is basically a courtroom thriller about a young kid accused of murdering a classmate, but then his dad happens to work for the DA's office with a great reputation and lots of experience, so that complicates the whole trial. The family has a dark history too, which makes it even harder to argue because of their history. The book walks the reader through the trial and the family's ups and downs in trying to prove the son innocent, or maybe not. Dun dun dun.
So, what did you think about Defending Jacob? And remember, no spoilers.
So I enjoyed it overall. There were some lulls, and especially in the middle of the book, I was just kind of like, okay, let's get it moving. I want to know what happened. But the problem I had was I didn't really enjoy any of the main characters, which I think was intentional. I believe, like the Andy, which is the dad, and you get his point of view, is kind of an asshole. The kid is super unlikable, and the mom, I mean, I feel bad for the mom. It is, so it's just, I don't know. But I think that was intentional as far as like Andy being unreliable and then Jacob being Jacob. It was enjoyable, but I thought it was a bit predictable as well. But overall, so good.
In some information that's going to shock you all, I did not think it was predictable. At least most of it was not predictable. I really liked the book, though. It kind of followed a pattern that some other books in this genre have for me, where I get really into it at first, and then the middle section, like Barbara mentioned in this book, it definitely does have like a lull. It slows down. It's not as page turner, not as much of a page turner in the middle as it gets back to at the end. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I, like Barbara said, none of the characters are very likable. I actually really liked that the author chose Andy, the main character, to be the narrator, because I like the unreliable narrator in books, and you never really know if you're getting all the facts when one of your characters in the book is giving you solely that perspective, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, overall, I definitely liked it. It was a good thriller.
Yeah, this one was right in my wheelhouse as far as genre goes. I love a good courtroom whodunit thriller. So I enjoyed this one. It was predictable at times. Surprisingly, I was able to predict it at times. But it definitely kept me reading nonetheless. It was overall just enjoyable. I didn't think it was too slow necessarily. I mean, I would agree that maybe it was a little bit slower in the middle, but I still felt like there were enough plot points throughout and enough kind of like twists and turns to keep me interested. I didn't think the characters sucked necessarily. I liked Andy's character. I actually liked Jacob's character to an extent. Laurie was a little annoying, but you know.
Now, I want to be clear. I like the characters were all well written. I just thought they were shitty people.
Well.
Yeah. That's
Well,
I think they
okay.
were very well written. Like I said, I just didn't enjoy them because I thought they were awful.
I thought that Michael was saying that he just didn't like the characters, like the writing of the characters, so I misunderstood there.
I'm glad you clarified that because no, the writing of the characters was great. I think that William
Mhm.
Landay is a fantastic author. The way that he wrote the story and the
Mhm.
characters, he did such a good job. In fact, that I really did not like our narrator as a person. Frequently
Yeah.
throughout the book, like there were times where like, oh well, you know, okay, maybe Andy's. It's like, oh nope, just kidding. He's still not. But that's what I meant by that. So the characters were very well written, just not great people.
Just
I
shitty people.
concur. In case someone misconstrued what I said too,
Just shitty people.
they just made some real interesting choices.
which we'll get to later.
Yeah.
So like always, we're not going to go into our individual ratings at this point. Got to wait till the end for that. But our group score for Defending Jacob was a 6.75 out of 10. So with that, would you recommend this book? You know, I think that it's a pretty easy recommendation for me. I think that unless you're someone who just hates this genre, like you don't like reading about crime and, you know, like thrillers and this kind of thing is just not your cup of tea. But outside of that, I thought it was a relatively easy read, except for the middle section where it gets a little slow. But I thought it was really enjoyable. I think that, I mean, the book was really popular when it first came out. I wonder if there was a resurgence when the Apple TV Plus show came out as well.
Probably.
But sitting here thinking about it, like I can't think of anybody that if they asked, if they came up to me and was like, hey, I saw you read this book. What do you think? Like, I'd probably say, yeah, you should check it out. I liked it well enough to say that.
Yeah, I would recommend it. And apparently, like you just said, it's also a TV show too, which I didn't know when we originally had it recommended. I don't have Apple TV though, so I was like trying to figure out how I could watch it because I'm curious now, but have not watched it yet, but do plan to. And yeah, I mean, I think that there's enough of this genre to where I would recommend it to just about anybody.
Yeah, I believe I would recommend it. I feel like if the person I'm talking to says they like this type of book, I'd send it their way. It would be an easy recommendation. I'm also excited to watch the TV show because I'm really curious to know how Chris Evans is going to play Andy because he's such a likable person in like real life, and Andy's got, like I said, some interesting life choices that he makes throughout the book. So I'm very curious to know how he's going to play this person. So, and I think we decided if we can get Lauren to watch, maybe we can do a bonus episode of the TV show and talk about the differences and what we liked about book versus TV show too. So
I'm down for that.
I think that'd be fun. All right. For those of you leaving us now, don't forget to give us a rating if you like the show and leave a review if you're able to. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram. In both places, our handle is @BadassLitPod. We would love to hear from you. If you have a book you want us to read, please let us know. Now, Lauren's going to give us a short preview of our next episode. Next month, we are reading A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon.
Tanuva Malim is a sister of the Priory. For 50 years, she has trained to slay worms, but none have appeared since the Nameless One, and the younger generation is starting to question the Priory's purpose. To the north, in the queendom of Ennis, Sabran the Ambitious has married the new king of Roth, narrowly saving both realms from ruin. Their daughter, Glorian, trails in their shadow exactly where she wants to be. The dragons of the east have slept for centuries. Dumai has spent her life in a Sakanese mountain temple, trying to wake the gods from their long slumber. Now someone from her mother's past is coming to upend her fate. When the Dreadmount erupts, bringing with it an age of terror and violence, these women must find the strength to protect humankind from a devastating threat. Intricate and epic, Samantha Shannon sweeps readers back to the world of A Priory of the Orange Tree, showing us a course of events that shaped it for generations to come.
More dragons, hopefully. I don't know. There was no mention of dragons, so
it
I'm
did.
a little worried.
It said the dragons of the east have slept for centuries.
But we know they've been sleeping because in the Prior of the Orange Tree, those are the bad dragons, and we only see like 2 bad dragons, and the rest.
It's true. Fingers crossed for more dragons.
I want more. The cover promises dragons, and I swear I'm gonna be real pissed if I don't get it.
Listeners, if you know a book that's just chock full of dragons, Barber would really appreciate that recommendation.
If I haven't read it already, because I've read quite a few. But
drop
yes,
that
I
on Instagram. Send it over. Give her the dragons. And I'm also.
Barbara, are you on Dragon Talk?
That's probably a thing.
I should join.
I'm excited for this book, and I'm also excited for Lauren to listen to it and figure out how many of those words she mispronounced.
Yeah, well, I tried my best, Michael. I tried my best.
I did my best.
I know, I'm just giving you a hard time. Anyway, remember the second part of this episode is going to be an in-depth look at Defending Jacob, so if you do want to read it, stop listening right now and come back when you're done.
Hi, this is Leah Stuhler, creator and host of YA Book Chat podcast. If you love reading young adult books and chatting about them with your friends, then head on over to my podcast and take a listen. Each episode, my guest and I chat about a different YA book. We start spoiler-free and then head into our spoiler section where we dive into the mysteries of each book. And we do it with laughs and fun along the way. You can listen to YA Book Chat on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcast. And now, back to the show.
For those of you sticking around for the spoilers for this podcast, here we go. We're going to start off like we always do and talk about who gets the Badass Character Award. Barbara, who was your nomination?
I think for this particular book, it may be inappropriate to say if anyone gets one, because I don't think there really is one. And if I had to pick, like, you have a gun to my head, twisting my arm type thing, and I have to pick one, I would say maybe Derek, you, because he told the cops all that stuff about Jacob, even though it would have been easy just to disregard everything and be like, oh, you know, because he is friends with him, and some would say maybe a best friend. And so to go and not tell on your friend, but be honest with the misgivings that you have about your friend, I think takes a lot of courage to do so, especially to authority figures, and that you would also have to go and testify against your friend in court. Like, that's a big deal. So if I had to pick, it would be him, but it's really hard to be like, oh, there's a badass person in this book when there's a lot of shady shit going on. So
definitely an odd book to have a nomination for. It was an easy choice, though. Father O'Leary was the badass. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, Father O'Leary was a badass just because he's a bad person. I mean,
okay.
in a different story, effectively an Irish mob fixer would be a very interesting character.
Fair.
All I'm saying. Anyway, there really isn't a badass character in this book, at least. I mean, I guess we could nominate like the psychologist for like figuring out what the hell's going on with everybody.
Yeah.
I'm sure Lauren appreciates that.
This was a hard one this time. I honestly also don't think that there was a badass character. However, if I had to pick, because we're supposed to actually pick Michael, I would pick Andy because of his tenacity and his unwavering belief in his son. Even though it was like misguided and he is all kinds of messed up in other ways, I think like the fact that he like wanted to believe the best in his son says something for him. And then just his overall perseverance. Like, he's been through some shit. Like, he's not made the best life decisions himself. But I think that if I had to pick someone, it would have been him, just because I could not think of anyone else, and I didn't think about Derek. That's a good one, too.
And unfortunately, that means that there's not a consensus, so no one gets the Badass Character Award. Moving on from there, let's talk about the characters a little bit. I mean, it makes sense to start with Jacob, I think. Who wants to talk about our good friend Jacob?
One of the main characters, obviously, his name's literally the title. He's accused of murder. He is the son of Andy and Laurie. kind of a darker, disturbed kid, teenager, kind of an outcast at school, not super well liked, but also not like he's not. I guess he's not like an outcast, but he's not.
He's not a social pariah. Or
He's
anything
not like a
that.
social
He's
pariah.
just to himself with like
he
his
keeps
two
to himself.
friends.
He's pretty introverted. He's got a couple of close friends, but outside of that, people. I think that there were a couple of descriptions of him from like classmates or whatever that just says
He's
that
supposedly really good looking.
yeah, good looking.
I
but
remember that.
Not always the nicest, I guess.
Yeah. And he definitely had narcissistic tendencies at the like you pick that up in the book really early on, I feel like.
Yeah. He's mentally unstable a bit, as far as just, and it's so up and down and all over the place with like throughout the book, like, did he do it? Is this, is this coincidental? Is that, all these different things. But Jacob is basically teenage kid of Andy and Laurie, and he gets accused of the murder of a classmate, and lots of evidence make him look pretty bad, look like he is guilty, but then, there's, we'll probably get to that later, but that's Jacob.
I was going to say, we don't really ever find out whether he did it or not. Like, that is part of the book that you do not find out whether he did it or not. There's some hard and fast evidence against him, but that's still, there's
you're gonna have some
where he
strong
goes
suspicions.
100% he is the murderer. So you
Correct.
never end up knowing who the actual murderer is, which is very interesting.
No, very true.
Interesting or infuriating?
You decide.
I don't know. I think it's realistic, right? Because in the real world, in the situation, what happened, you'd never really know. You'd never know for sure. Not 100% anyway.
Michael. Okay.
I'm just saying.
I mean, if you have a video of someone doing the murder, then you do. So.
But in this case, you don't.
Right.
Or
So
if they find DNA
if,
evidence, Michael, there's lots of examples.
I'm assuming they didn't, or that probably would have been brought up in the novel, Lauren. This isn't that old of a book. So.
It was before DNA.
Anywho, Andy Barber is the next character. Andy is our main character and our perspective character, Jacob's father. He is the assistant district attorney of the area that they live in. And as Lauren pointed out when she was talking about her nomination, he's a very determined father. He's a very, I don't know. I think Andy's character shows a good example of like, unconditional love. Andy shows unconditional love and unconditional trust for his son. And that's he is a very interesting character. And that's just a little bit about him. We'll get into more things later. He was the narrator of the book as well, which I thought was really interesting because of what I just said and the fact that he's investigating his own, he becomes an unreliable narrator. And so you never really know if you're getting the full story or if the narrator is, censoring things that would push the audience in another direction, which I always find really fascinating. But anyway, that is Andy.
In real life, would he be allowed to do that though? To be on his son's own case? I don't think so.
Well, but he wasn't. He was taken off when his son got accused.
Yeah, but he was still very involved.
I mean
he could do that.
He's in the defense. He can't be the prosecutor. For sure not. But he wasn't. I mean, you can self-represent yourself. So really, like, realistically speaking, he could.
I just felt like it was ethically questionable.
I mean, that was part of the trial was them saying like, hey, like, why did you pick up the case if knowing that your son went to school with this kid? And they're like, oh, but that's pretty standard. So
I think it's pretty easy to understand why he did what he did, though, as his profession, and I feel like to not investigate this would have been very difficult for someone in that role. Let's see. Next character is Laurie.
So Laurie is Avi, Jacob's mom, married to Andy. She's like the golden child. I feel like she is well liked in the neighborhood. Everyone kind of goes to her. She, according to Andy, saved him. She was like the kind of girl that someone like him with his background, which Michael didn't really mention for Andy, which would have been actually kind of nice to mention his background. So before Laurie, Andy has a crappy childhood because all the men in his family since his great grandpa, I believe, has murdered somebody. So, and he grew up without a dad because his dad murdered someone when he was like really young, 4 or 5 or something, and went to jail for the rest of his life. So he's in jail. And Andy never thought that he could, grab someone like Laurie because she was like, this perfect person. So that's Laurie. And then throughout the novel, you kind of just see her deteriorating because of what happened with Jacob. And I like to point out that Andy gaslights the shit out of his wife multiple times, and it really irks me. But I feel like she was like the social butterfly of the group of their relationship, and that really, I feel like that's why you see her really deteriorating, because they become social pariahs because of Jacob being accused of murder. So like no one wants to hang out with them, no one wants to talk to them, and I feel like she's the glue that holds the family together as well. And when she snapped, the whole family fell apart.
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe her there at the end. I 100% agree with that. Bloody Billy Barber.
Billy Barber is Andy's dad, the murderer. So he's doing life in prison for murders that we don't really get any details on, other than just that he's a little bit, but like not.
He raped and murdered a girl, but I feel like she wasn't. They didn't call her a woman, so I feel like maybe teenager-ish age.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it happened like when he was also a teenager. That was unclear.
Well, he went to jail at 22 years old.
Okay. Yeah, it made it seem like he had more than just the one incident of killing to me. Like the way that they talked about him, it sounded like there was like a string of things that I felt like I wanted more details about Billy, but we didn't really get a whole lot.
We really didn't.
My assumption is you don't get a nickname like Bloody Billy Barber without, just for one killing, but maybe you do.
Right.
It could be a grotesque type of way that he murdered her, and so...
That's true. But yeah, he's Andy's father. Andy visits him during the investigation of the Jacobs trial to kind of, because they're talking about the murder gene, and like he gets curious, and so stuff ends up kind of going down with that in a not so good way, or I guess we don't know that that's what happens, but it appears that Billy sends someone on behalf of him to take care of some stuff for Jacob. So,
I guess he's trying to be grandfatherly. Murder for murder.
I got you, grandson.
Right,
I'm going to send a hitman for you.
I think that's an interesting point, though, because it's easy to say that jokingly, but I think that really,
I wasn't joking.
He really was.
That's his way of caring, of showing his
in the only
love.
way he knows how.
Is like murder. Let me keep my son, because he knows what jail is like, and he was like, let me keep my grandson away from this crap that I'm subjugated to. So like, what's the best way to do that? Well,
yeah, it was like you said, his way of showing that he cares, in a way only a murderer would know, I suppose.
And it worked out for him to an extent.
It did. Next up is Ben Rifkin. I don't have a whole lot to say about Ben. Ben's the classmate that is murdered at the beginning of the book. He gets stabbed in the park, and we find out little tidbits about Ben throughout the story. It turns out Ben was kind of a dick, apparently.
I don't think there's a kind of. He seems like a real asshole.
Ben was a dick.
Yeah.
And I kind of got the vibe from a lot of his classmates that people were like, well, I'm not surprised he died. He It's kind of not a good person.
Oh my god.
That kind of was the way some of these teenage kids were like, well, Ben wasn't
he bullied everybody.
Yeah.
So, I feel like it's not, you shouldn't say it wasn't a shock to them that he got murdered. I feel like people wouldn't be surprised if someone retaliated, maybe like punched him, Michael, but I feel like murder is we took the left rail real quick on that one.
He was a bully. He deserved to die.
Right, apparently.
Damn.
The boy who lived come to die.
But anyway, that's Ben Rifkin. We don't really have much more on that character.
He is the caveat that started this whole thing, Dan Rifkin is obviously Ben's father. We get just a little bit of him, obviously a grieving father who is grieving. That's kind of it. And then towards the end, when Jacob gets off, since Grandpa Barber sent a murderer to kill the person. Anyways, this whole thing happened, and Dan tried to go and stab the family after they got out, and I was like, oh my god. And I like how no one batted an eye in the fact that he tried stabbing them with a kitchen knife. I'm like, are you not going to prosecute his ass? Like, he just tried to murder you. Like, that should be something. But maybe it's like an eye for an eye. Like, hey, we're going to forgive you.
He's grieving.
He's grieving, I guess.
Dan was looking for some vigilante justice, I think. Since he felt like the justice system.
I felt bad for Dan.
Yeah, you kind of feel bad for him. But at the same time, that is not a good enough reason to go stabbing people either.
It is not. But I felt bad for Dan.
And I do think that that's why.
Was a dick.
Right, exactly.
I think that's why Andy didn't press charges or anything on Dan, because I think that he understands, as someone who is part of the justice system and has seen probably lots of,
Well, but according to Michael, your son was asking for it. So,
right.
Maybe if you wore different clothes.
I didn't say that. I said some of the characters in the book gave that vibe. I did not have that opinion. Michael did not say this teenager should be murdered. That was a character in the book. Just throwing that out as a disclaimer, since we're I'm being defamed live on a podcast.
All right, so let's talk about Neil LaJudith. He is the prosecution in Jacob's case. He is a former friend of Andy's. I got the vibe that they used to be friends. I feel like they said that.
Mentor-mentee type.
Yeah, so like kind of friends.
Yeah.
And he works at the DA's office, and he is just convinced the entire novel that Jacob is guilty and that Andy is too involved, which I agree Andy is too involved in the case, just ethically. But how can you not be, as if it's your kid and that's your job, I had mixed feelings for good old Neil.
It's hard because it's Andy's point of view of what we're seeing Neil. And so, like I said, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because all of what we're getting of him is his point of view. So
that's true.
I feel like it's probably in the middle, because Andy did not have nice thoughts about poor Neil.
I was going to say, I didn't think he really ever seemed friendly towards him. He, even at the beginning, before all this happened, he described him as like a ladder jumper, just someone who's trying to climb the ladder and take people's jobs and move higher up the company, or in this case, the local legal team. But
maybe it was Neil that had mentioned something about them being friends previously.
I never got like friendly vibe. Like I said, I got the mentor-mentee vibe, because Andy always mentioned he was younger and like took him under my wing, and I taught him everything I know, and then like he'd use little things of legal stuff that I don't have no idea what he was talking about, but that's the vibe I got from their relationship. It was never like friendship, more of...
I'm just making shit up. It's fine.
I mean, no, maybe that's the vibe.
They were friends.
I feel like they were co-worker friends. Like, I wouldn't say like grab a beer like he did with the other cop dude, Yeah,
I guess maybe I'm thinking like that they were cordial and like...
for sure they were.
Positive.
We worked on the same team up until this point, so...
Yeah, it didn't seem like they hated each other or anything prior. And then all of a sudden, Neil was like the worst human ever in his mind.
Because he accused his son, so...
And last, and probably also least, we have Leonard Patz, local pedophile. I feel like I just described like his crappy business card. Anyway, Leonard Patz.
Leonard Patz, pedophile for hire.
Leonard Patz is he is a pedophile in the region he's been convicted previously of crimes of that nature. He is the person that Andy is just determined killed Ben. And a large chunk of the book is Andy trying to prove that it was Leonard Patz.
He literally stalked him.
Yep. So that's Leonard Patz. He doesn't play a huge role. He's definitely an interesting. I mean, he's shown enough that we should talk about him, and he's also a big enough part of the plot. As Laurie mentioned earlier, like Leonard Patz literally gets murdered over this because, allegedly he confessed, had like a confessed and then killed himself.
He for sure got murdered. Billy sent one of his guys,
father or something,
basically staged a suicide of Leonard, and staged like a note that basically said, like, it was a confession note So I'm guessing what happened was somebody had a gun to his head because they're like, oh, the handwriting match. It's like, yeah, that's not that hard. Like, you got a gun to my head. I'm going to write down what you tell me to write down.
Well, sure, you can pretend like I won't shoot you if you write this note down. Writes the note down, kills.
Right. Yeah. So basically staged the suicide and had the note, the whole confession. So Jacob ended up getting off on that, sort of, not really. We, like Michael said, we don't really technically know if he ever was guilty or innocent or whatever, but this definitely played a role in him being less questioned by the general public, because they're like, oh, we have a solution, like it's resolved.
So yes, I do think Jacob was guilty at the end of the book. Absolutely, without a doubt, 100%. He's guilty as sin. There were definitely times in the book where I didn't, though, like that there were or not. I would say I don't think I ever thought that he was like for sure not guilty, but there were times when I didn't know without a shadow of a doubt, and I was hesitant to think that he was. I think that this aspect of his story is one of my favorite parts of the book, because I think the reason that I wavered back and forth at times is because Andy was our unreliable narrator, and he wanted so badly for it not to be Jacob that I think that it came across in the book that way, and that changed my perspective on it a little bit too, which is kind of interesting to think about. But at the end of the book, absolutely, Jacob was a murderer. He killed 2 people at least.
Right, at least, yeah. I definitely believe he's guilty. I feel like there is a lot of damning evidence against him for both of the murders. We just don't get enough of an alibi or an explanation from his perspective, from Jacob's perspective, on his innocence either. Like, I feel like it's all from Andy's perspective, which obviously he's the narrator, but like we don't get, like, Jacob never really tries to convince anyone that he's innocent, ever. Like, never, I mean, not even like a conversation. Like, typically if somebody who's innocent, or just anybody, is accused of these types of crimes, you would have some back and forth on like, no, I didn't, like, I would never do, like, and he just never did that, which I thought was interesting. And just going solely on the information that was provided and the point of view we got, he definitely looks guilty to me. And I thought that from jump. He just gave me murder vibes.
Yeah, same. I 100%. Oh yeah, there was no doubt in my mind that this kid did it. I was very quick to do that too, just because of his initial response to it all, and then the dad's comment. Like, the dad, so what I found interesting, I'm gonna like circle back to this, but what I found interesting in the book was it was written in the way that it sounded like Andy was writing down what had happened in the past, or he was like telling somebody else what was going on, and he would intermittently insert his thoughts, present Andy's thoughts on what was going on in the past. And there was one point in the book, in the very beginning of the book, when he's retelling the day of the murder, or no, sorry, the day of when the kids go back to school, and Jacob's response to like all these cops around, all these news van around and everything, and he seemed gleeful about it all. And the dad makes a comment, which I thought was so weird to make, where he was like, oh, like, what 14-year-old wouldn't be excited because it's a different school thing? That was so weird to me, because
super weird.
If it was me and it was a 14-year-old, and like, even if I wasn't good friends with Ben, even if he was an asshole to me, even if he picked on me, you would have empathy. As a normal 14-year-old, you would at least be empathetic, and you wouldn't be gleeful. You would maybe be like, oh, this is super annoying. Like, I know some kids were acting that way, like, oh, this is annoying. Like, we have to get body scanned or whatever they were doing. Like, you can't, like, they were super involved on what they were wearing, what they were bringing in school. Like, you were annoyed. But he literally said he was gleeful about it. That is not a normal response to the situation. And from then I was like, this bitch did it. Like, there was no doubt in my mind, and it just kept stacking against him, the stuff. So yeah, no, I did not think for 1 second that he was not guilty, especially when it just keeps adding and adding, that we keep learning more and more about him and like his really weird tendencies. That is not a normal reaction or things to obsess about as a 14-year-old boy. I don't care what frickin' Andy said in his little mind.
Yeah.
So no doubt in my mind. What I will mention, though, is I don't believe that him murdering Ben was a premeditated murder. I think what happened was they probably ran into each other. Ben was once again being an asshole to him, and he had the knife in his backpack or whatever, and he was defending himself, got a little carried away with the 2 extra stabs, or maybe it was just like, well, F you already did, I'm going to stab you and make sure you're dead. And that was an accident. I feel like it wasn't, maybe not even an accident, but it wasn't for sure premeditated. Maybe he didn't even mean to murder him. He stabbed once, was like, oh, I'm going to get him. And now he maybe enjoyed it. Was I'm going to do stabby. But he definitely got a taste for it. And I think after the fact, he was like, hey, I enjoyed this. Let me just murder more people.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think the Ben murder, if Jacob did it, was definitely not a premeditated murder. I think it happened. It was a crime of passion, as they say, and he found that he enjoyed it. I think you're 100% right on that.
Well, and then what else was not a normal response on Jacob's part was if he did, he didn't even wash the blood off of himself. He just went to class, but then also like Barber said, obviously it's not a normal response to be gleeful, but everybody, even if they hated this guy, are gonna feel something like scared or worried or annoyed. So that was a good way to kind of put that into perspective.
Okay, in the opening of the story, Cass says, "We believe we want to believe." The statement is repeated several times throughout the book. Discuss its significance. Is there a truth that no one wants to believe?
I think it alludes to the idea that regardless of hard and fast truths, people believe what they want to believe, and everyone sees the truth through their own lens and life experiences. So basically, Andy is viewing Jacob through his own biases and life experiences, even though he has training as a DA to literally not do that. He can't help it. It's his son. He believes what he wants to believe, that Jacob is innocent, and he will not be convinced otherwise, regardless of the evidence that's against him, regardless of his own son's reaction and the fact that he's reacting in a very not great way. Regardless of any, I don't know, they had a fingerprint, right? They all these different things that are kind of telling him hey, this is a problem. And he refuses to believe it until the end. And you get moments there where he wavers, right? He's there are moments in his POV that you're he's questioning Jacob's innocence, I think, but he maintains that he's innocent throughout. And I think that really just plays to the whole people believe what they want to believe regardless of the facts.
Yeah, so I think this quote is specifically about Andy, because he's so set on the fact that Jacob didn't do it, that he is ignoring blatant red flags about his own kid. How people say, you have rose-colored glasses for a relationship? Andy has rose-colored glasses for his own child. There are massive signs that he is just ignoring, and like Lauren said, he is a DA or assistant DA. He knows what to look for, and he's choosing to be no. I think the biggest thing mine was the knife that he found. If you truly believed your son was innocent, would you not be let's just test it then?
Right?
You
just
would get your
away.
answer. Let me just throw it. To me, that looks guilty as F. That is someone... there is a sliver of a doubt, a 1% chance that your son did it. So what are you going to do? You're going to get rid of the evidence, and that, to me, that's what it looked like.
Even if Jacob, subconsciously Andy knew that that he did it, but he couldn't consciously come to terms with it.
Agreed, 100%. I feel if he were to say yes, all of these self-doubt about himself and his family, all this stuff would crash into him. So he was just I'm just going to play ignorance is bliss here, and that's what he did. But yeah, the knife thing was really that quote to me was that knife throwing away is ridiculous. Okay, well, if your son says he didn't do it to test it, then test it. You would 100% be okay, well, there we go, we got our answer. But he didn't, it was very frustrating at times for me to see him also ignore his wife's feelings about it and just how much he gaslit the crap out of her about her feelings. Like, he was like, no. And she's like, come on, I'm asking you to be honest with me. Like, can't we have an honest conversation? He's like, no. And I'm like, oh, bro, come on. This is your wife.
The therapist in me cringed so much at their interactions.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a ton to add to this one. I think you guys did a good job answering it. But the quote, I think that quote applies. I mean, in the book, it's definitely applying to Andy, but I think that quote can probably apply to humanity in general. When they talk about we believe we want to believe, I think that's generally like that's how it is. We believe we want to believe, and a lot of times when we're presented evidence to the contrary, it's a discomforting feeling. It's not, you don't just accept this new truth all of a sudden. And I think in the book, we got a really good dichotomy between two characters on this quote. And we have Andy, like you guys said, who was constantly presented with the truth or evidence that differed from what he wanted to believe. And he just was like, no, screw this. I'm sticking with my guns. And you have the flip side of that. And you have his wife, Laurie, who wants to believe what Andy believes. She wants to believe that her son is not a murderer. She wants to believe he's not capable of this. But as the evidence is presented to her, she finds herself no longer able to believe what she wants to believe. And you see that discomfort and how awful things get for Laurie as like this inner turmoil inside her happens as she's presented all these things and is forced to see things from a new perspective. So I thought that was really interesting on the author's part.
Basically, Laurie is a typical human being. Like, no mother wants to believe that their child is capable of something like that. And like, she goes through all of the mental health struggles and psychological things like to come to terms with that. And Andy, you can see his own past and his own maybe psychiatric psychology tendencies for himself, to where he's able to just turn that piece off and just totally live in Fantasyland, really.
Okay, so next question. Is Andy a good father? Why or why not?
So I feel like this is a difficult question, only because I think he's a good father in the sense that he raised Jacob the way he thought was best and had an unwavering opinion of his son. I think he wanted so badly to have the perfect life and to never let his kid experience what he went through with an absentee father, and to also live with the fact that your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather murdered all these people. So he wanted to like shield his kid away from that. But I feel like in doing so, he did a disservice. Just because he wasn't neglectful or abusive doesn't mean that you are a great dad. I feel like those standards of not doing those two things are just basic traits of being a good dad. Like, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Like, you should not do those things to your child. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a good father. Like I said, I think he did the disservice to Jacob in knowingly not seeking help for him and hiding his background from him. Like, he was not honest with Laurie or Jacob, two awful things that he did, especially when obviously Laurie had some trepidation early on in Jacob's life. And she was like, hey, I want to see someone. Like, I want to put him somewhere. I want to see what we can do for him. And he's like, nah, he's good. This is normal child behavior, normal little boy behavior. It's fine. He'll grow out of it. And because he did that, he didn't help Jacob get those tools to help him with his feelings. So I don't think there is such a thing as a murder gene. Like, I do not believe that. But anger issues are. And if you boil it down, if Jacob could have helped himself control the anger, maybe he wouldn't have snapped and stabbed a bitch, Instead, maybe he would have had the tools to be like, hey, this guy's being an asshole to me. Don't confront him. Just don't let it consume you. Put him in boxing or something to punch a bitch or something. I don't know. But like, he could have helped him, give him the tools. So when Jake was feeling a certain way, he could have dealt it in a more normal way of dealing with these stuff, instead of just being like, nothing about your history. Nothing about it. you're on your own, kid. Sorry. Like, he shielded him, I think, too much of it. You know, like, there's a wrong way and a right way. And unfortunately, he didn't hit the middle, I feel like, which would have been better for Jacob. Like, if you were treating someone with, like, you know, your family has anger issues or something like that, and you don't tell your kid, then you're not helping him or her deal with that.
So I agree with everything that Barbara said for the most part. I think that it's a really hard question to answer because for all the things that Barbara just said, there's so many things you could look at that Andy could have done better and it would have made him a better father. But I think that the core of the question, like, was he a good father? I think Andy was the best father he could have been. I think it was an example of, or at least, maybe not a great example, but an example of generational trauma where he got passed down from father to son and father to son and father to son. And I think Andy did what he thought was the best thing he could do in the situation. And that's, you know, that he was working with the only tools that he had, and those weren't the good tools. They weren't great tools. He didn't have the capacity to do all the things that, you know, in hindsight, we'd really liked him to do. And so that's my 2 cents on him being a good father.
Yeah, so I agree with both of you to an extent. So I think that Andy is the best father that he knows how to be, given the skills and circumstances he's in. He cares for his son deeply, would go to great lengths to protect him, obviously. Is it arguable that in protecting him, he may be putting other people at risk? Definitely. Does that make him a good person? Probably not. But as far as being a father to Jacob goes, he does seem to be a good one, regardless of the other circumstances. Now, my, I guess, perspective on kind of what you said, Barbara, about him not sharing so that he could prepare him. I think it's so hard because it seems to me just like psychologically, Andy isn't able to wrap his mind around the fact that, like, or to accept the fact of who his own father is and who his own grandfather is. And so, like, it seems like he is just so disconnected with that part of himself that he's not even willing to believe that it's a possibility. And so he's shoved it so far out of his realm of existence that he subconsciously just his brain doesn't allow him to see that Jacob is displaying warning signs, which is frustrating because, like, Laurie does try and bring it to his attention, which to me is just like, you gotta listen, but like he's got it in such a box, like way in the back of his brain, just super protected, I think, because of his own trauma that he dealt with. And this is totally just me, like, psychoanalyzing the situation, but that's where I'm like, okay, like he's a good dad still. Like, I think that he did the best that he could with the skills that he had and his own shit, for lack of a better term, that he was navigating. I think that throughout the novel, he clearly, like, cares a lot for his son, and regardless of him being not a great person in general, him the dad or him the son, both of them, they're not great people. No, we've already established that. I think that, you know, he did what he could.
All right, moving on from there. Is Jacob a product of his upbringing? Do you think he is a violent person because his environment makes him violent, or do you think he had violent inclinations since birth? I think Lauren's probably going to have the best answer on this because of the training that she's had for her profession. But I personally, I think it's a combination of both. I don't think, like Barbara said earlier, I don't think anybody's genetically predisposed to just kill people. Like, I don't think that, you know, there's a gene that just is there and it's like, oh, well, you're going to be a murderer because you have this gene. I think that anger problems probably, especially when you're talking about, you know, having a father that doesn't know how to handle his anger, and then his father didn't know how to handle his. And so those traits get passed along. So I think it's a combination of things, of his environment as well as his, you know, just being born with it, so to speak. But I would lean a lot more heavily on the environment. I think that the signs were there that Jacob had anger issues and they ignored them. And because it was never addressed and by address, I just mean like no one ever talked to him about it. No one, you know, took the time to be like, hey, this is not great behavior. What's going on? Why did you do this? Why are you acting this way? And because of that, they just kept evolving. And if something is left to continue evolving, then it's just going to get worse. So I guess that was a long answer. Short answer is I think it's a combination of environment and predisposed.
Yeah, I mean, based on what we know about his childhood, Jacob seems like he has had violent tendencies since birth. I also don't know how much I buy the whole killer gene thing. I think that genetics can definitely predispose people to aggression and things like that, but environment is, I feel, more important than genetics because that's why we have cycle breakers, right? That, trauma begets trauma in families and it gets passed on, and until somebody kind of breaks that cycle, then it appears to be genetic because it's a cycle within families, but a lot of it is environment. So yeah, I think a lot of it's nurture over nature. Nature definitely plays a role. His story seems to show that he definitely had an inclination since a very young age towards violence. Like you said, Michael, it may have just been ignored or overlooked because they were trying so hard to, well, they really, Andy was trying so hard to not believe that there was anything wrong with Jacob because of his own upbringing and his own trauma and his own stuff. And so despite Laurie saying, hey, like, something might be wrong, we should probably get him help, like, let's get him evaluated, those sorts of things that normal parents would want to do for their kid, he didn't get, which is another product of his environment, basically, which is sad.
Yeah, I think, Andy wanted so badly to be normal himself, and I think that extended to, for him to be normal, his family needed to be normal. And
100%, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's both. I think you have the predisposition for things, but it's our actions that dictate it. It's our choices in life that makes us a quote-unquote violent person or not a violent person. I do think it's harder for some people to fight those urges because of the predisposition, but I still think overall it's how you choose to act upon those tendencies. So if I remember correctly, I remember studying this, that they said people with violent tendencies or anger issues and stuff like that, they had a lower frontal precortex because that's the part of the brain that tells you to stop. And people that they did studies on noticed that people who didn't have that stop, that break is what they called it in my class, had smaller frontal precortex. And so it was just interesting to see that you can see that in the study. So that part of there right there is the nature versus nurture. But then I feel like if you put that type of a person in a really crappy environment with seeing violent, like Lauren said, like violent tendency and all this other stuff, they grow up with that, then that's all they know. That's how they're going to act. Whereas you see with Andy, he saw what happened with everyone else in his family, and he makes all these choices, these little small choices not to act upon it. But his thoughts when you're reading it is not a normal thought. He gets angry when he gets pulled off the case, and physically you don't see that anger. Like, he's a very cool, calm, collected person. But in his thoughts, his first thing was, I cannot look at Neil right now because if I look at him, I'm going to wring his neck. That is not a normal thought process. Or at least, I mean, sure, you're going to get angry because you're getting pulled off a case. Like, that's okay. That's pretty standard. But to say, like, if I look at him, I will do this, that's pretty aggressive of a thought process. But you can see him being like, I'm not going to do that because if I were to do that, this would happen. So he knows that he could do this. There's the chance that he can do that. He chooses not to do it. So that's why I think it's both. You have these tendencies and all these stuff. Everyone does for a lot of things. Like, I freaking love sugar, man. I will eat the crap out of sugar because I know that. I do not buy stuff because I will eat it. Like, if you put it in front of me, it's really hard for me to say, like, nah, son, I don't want a piece of cake. Like, yeah, I want that. So I just don't buy it. I don't put it in there because it's a lot harder for me to say no to that. So it's that type of mentality, I think. So I do think it's both, and depending on how you grow up, like, you either see it and you act upon it, or maybe you get some tools that can help you deal with that.
Yeah, because trauma also affects the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, and can be seen on, like, brain scans. Like, kids that grow up in traumatized situations, brains physically look different than kids that don't have it. So.
Very fascinating stuff, man.
That is really interesting. I didn't know that. I'm going to have to ask for some links to check that out because I'm curious. But anyway, moving on here, bullying is such a hot topic in today's media. How did the author incorporate it into the story, and do you think its role had anything to do with Jacob's disposition?
So the fact that Ben Rifkin was a bully definitely adds a layer to the murder story, I think. It allows readers to empathize with Jacob. I think that that's kind of the idea, is we're supposed to empathize with him, or whoever the killer is. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. A bit, because it paints Ben in a more negative light. It's easier to, I don't know, to have empathy for the murderer when the subject or the victim is an ass, basically. Like, nobody deserves what happened to him, but it seems like authors do this a lot to make it so that you feel bad for the murderer. It's a common trope in this genre, so.
I mean, according to Michael, Ben deserved it, so...
Yeah, Michael's trying to tell Ben's dad, like, hey, your son, he was an asshole. He deserved to die.
Maybe suing both of you
Stab.
Defamation of character.
Oh, gosh, I'm just joking. Anyway, so I think it humanizes Ben. I always find it interesting to see when someone dies, how quick we are to paint them in a better light. And I feel like that's what this book was trying to show. Like, oh no, poor Ben, he's murdered. And everyone's like, oh, he was such a great man. Yeah, and all this stuff. And it's like, Ben seemed like a little shit to me. And as the reader, you can see why, you know, if this killer was a schoolmate of his, like, why they be driven to lash out? Not necessarily murder. I feel like that's a high step to go from, like, not doing anything versus, like, punching versus pushing versus maybe telling the teachers to just stabby stab, you know? So, kind of a high response to that. But, like, you know, you can see it. Like, that's a reaction to all bullying that had been done is, hey, I'm going to retaliate back. And, you know, enough is enough. And unfortunately for Ben, Jacob chose violence as a way of stopping him and not a better way of maybe dealing with the situation.
Picked on the wrong kid today.
Yeah, exactly. You picked on the wrong kid. Like, not today, Satan. And he went stab. So,
I pretty much agree with both of you on this. I think that bullying is a very hot button issue. I think that Lauren's 100% correct that it's a trope that's in a lot of these books, that the goal is to humanize or get you to empathize with the bad guy or the villain. And it's effective, and that's why it's used. But at the end of the day, I think that, I mean, I think you could argue that bullying had something to do with Jacob's, I don't want to say predisposition, though. I think it had to do with, like, it's part of the environment that
it's a trigger.
It's part of the environment. I mean, bullying can be super traumatic, and we don't know how intense the bullying was from Ben. Like, we don't know if it was just like name calling or if it was like way, way, way beyond that. And so without that information, you know, I think that most readers assign the bully role as what we're, you know, that stereotypical bully, like the knock the books out of their hand or make fun of them or, you know, shove them in a locker or all that kind of stuff you see in movies. But I mean, yeah, I think absolutely it added to the environment and definitely didn't help in Jacob's case to, it was a negative factor in his environment causing him to start to act the way that he does. Do you think Neil Judas acts ethically in this novel? What about Andy? What about Laurie? So
Neil was a dick, but we saw him through Andy's eyes, like I mentioned before, and Andy is a super unreliable narrator, so take that with a grain of salt. So, you know, maybe Neil isn't a dick, but it, you know, if we were to see him through someone else's point of view. As far as, like, ethically, I feel like certain things maybe he didn't do so ethically. Like, instead of focusing on just one person, maybe he should have looked at more. But I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea what the thing of it is, like how to proceed with that. So I really don't really know how to answer that, if he was ethical or not. I'm not really sure. And especially, like, how do you treat a 14-year-old kid? You know, like, I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that for him. As far as for Andy, for sure was not ethical. Like, throwing away evidence, even if it didn't happen to be the knife that killed the kid, like, that's just not cool. Like, you don't do that as someone who, in his position, knows better not to do that. Gaslighting Laurie, like, all the stuff that he did was super unethical. But, you know, I don't think he thought he did anything wrong. So that's why he was like, oh, it's fine what I'm doing. I mean, he literally lied under oath at one point. Like, he knows what he's doing. All of it is very unethical. For Laurie, I think she took some drastic measures, and it was super unethical in how she dealt with Jacob and her feelings about Jacob. But honestly, I can empathize. I can empathize with her because the first time around, she didn't know. The second time around, she knew what she felt about. She loved her son, but she knew what he was. And she, poor woman, got gaslit the crap out from her husband. And she even said, what happens next? Even if he gets off, we need to do something about this. Even if there's a sliver of a chance that he did do it. And Andy's like, no, we're good. And then it happens again. And like, as a mother, she saw another mom lose a child, and to go through that, like, you can see her just fall apart because of that, you know? And so she did what she thought she could do as a mom who still loves her child, but sees him for what he is. Is it ethical? No, of course not. But I can empathize of why she didn't. Andy cannot see, like, that bro, like, he had some generational trauma he needed to deal with. Her, I get it.
So I'll start with Neil LaJudas, I guess. I don't think that Neil LaJudas was unethical. I think LaJudas was doing his job. I think that it's easy to see him as unethical or as this dick because we're seeing him through Andy's perspective. And I think that Andy sees him that way because he feels like he's targeting his son, and this is all like some personal vendetta against Andy. And I think the reality of it is, I mean, the ADA doesn't pick who they charge. Like the police bring them the case that they've put together, and then they do what they will with it. So the implication that Andy kind of gives that, like, the police were like, it was the pedophile, and then LaJudas is like, no, it wasn't. It was Jacob. And like, so yeah, I think LaJudas was acting ethically. I think the closest to unethical would have been what was so the judge pulled them aside at the beginning and said, like, talked about the murder gene and all that stuff as part of the investigation, and said, if you bring this up, it's like, it's poison. If you bring it up, I will declare a mistrial, and like demanded that. And he did bring that up. So that was maybe, I don't know if that's unethical or if it's just like a shitty thing to do, but that's the closest to unethical for Neil. Andy, I agree with you 100%. Not going to harp on that. He's incredibly unethical. He did a lot of things that he thought he needed to do to protect his son that were super, super unethical, like hiding evidence and going out and intimidating witnesses and forcing them to talk to you when they're freaking minors, and stalking the local pedophile and stalking children and all sorts of crazy unethical things. But so Andy was unethical. Laurie, God, like Barber said, Laurie's tough because it's a really hard question of ethics for her, because like she killed her son, and it's not like, dude, with that sentence alone, if that's all the information you have, then you're like, that's the most unethical thing. It's so immoral. Like, how could you do that? But with all the information we have in the book, like Barbara said, you can empathize with where she was coming from. She didn't know, like, the justice system didn't do their job, and her son, as much as she loved him, is a monster, and she knows this. And I think if you were to ask Laurie, that she would tell you that she was doing the only ethical thing she knew to do. And I think that makes it very hard to answer this question. And I'm going to say it's a gray area. I don't know. I'm not going to say that she's ethical or not ethical, because gray area.
Killing one to protect the many is quite a normal thinking process for people.
No, and I think that there were other options that she had, like turning him in or getting him committed. You don't have to have your husband's permission for those things.
No. Yeah, she definitely went drastic.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to see, though, why she did. Like, because
that's what I said. You can empathize with her.
Empathize.
Like, as a father, as a mother, you can empathize with her.
But turning him in would do nothing. He can't be tried again for the crime that they already acquitted him on for the mistrial.
I'm talking about the second one.
He can't.
No, because that was
either, because that was in a foreign country. There's no jurisdiction. So unless she's going to take him back to that country. Yeah,
she would have to take him back to the country. Or was it Mexico? I thought it was Cabo,
I think it was
right?
a Caribbean.
Oh, no, Jamaica. Yeah. It was in Jamaica.
So unless she's going to fly back to Jamaica, the U.S. doesn't have any jurisdiction there. So literally her option is either to do what she did,
or wait till he murders someone
wait
else.
till he kills someone
Yeah.
else and then hope the justice system gets it right this time.
That's true.
Or like Lauren said, forcibly commit him. But I think that he's a minor, so I guess that the parent can do that without the kid's consent. So maybe that would have been the best option.
Yeah, it would have.
But I mean, how long would they be able to commit him is the thing.
Depends on the circumstance.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, after the ending, I think it's fair to say that what Laurie did for me was not ethical. She pretty much murdered her son. I can empathize with her. But I think that like a psych hold or something else that was maybe less drastic should have been at least considered. And maybe it was. We don't get that perspective. As far as the Judas, I think bringing Andy's history and whatnot into it more than staying focused on Jacob seemed a little sketchy. That was really the only like unethical thing I would think for him. Otherwise, I feel like he pretty much was doing his job. I think that Andy's is arguable because kind of like Barber said, I think that he thinks that he's being ethical because he like just vehemently believes in Jacob's innocence or has convinced himself that he's innocent. So I think that he thinks he's being ethical, but I don't think he was ethical the vast majority of the time. He throws away the knife. He tells Jacob to rinse possible blood off of his swimsuit. Like, there's just a lot of ethically questionable moments for him. So,
all right. And what was the most damning piece of evidence against Jacob? Was there anything that you felt exonerated him? I think the most damning piece of evidence against him, it's easy to say everything because there's so many things that they find, and it's so many things that make him a creepy kid, but aren't really damning evidence. I think that the only thing that's really damning for both murders is the blood. There's blood in his clothes when he killed Ben. There was blood in his swimsuit that he hadn't washed it off would have proved that he killed the other girl. I think that's really the only damning evidence. The knife maybe, but if they could have proved that the knife was the murder weapon, that would have been super damning. That's it, man. Yeah, that's the blood. Was there anything? Oh, that feel exonerated him? No, there wasn't. I mean, so okay, fine. So looking at it from a legal perspective, yes, the suicide and apparent confession of Leonard Patz exonerated him because that's literally what happened. I think that's all BS, as we've talked about in the past. This question, but yeah, that's what got him off. I think that had that not happened, he would have gone to jail. It would have been, or it would have been because the evidence was so circumstantial in some cases. Maybe it would have been a hung jury and he would have gotten a mistrial anyway. But I think more than likely he would have gone to jail had it not been for that. So that's really the only thing that exonerated him.
Yeah, I just said the blood on him, his demeanor throughout the trial, just being completely unfazed, really pointed to his mental state. His own history, just all of those things were pretty damning. His stories didn't line up a lot of times, like the fact that he said he saw Ben's body on his way to school, but then he said he didn't. There's just a lot of shit that made him look real guilty. I don't personally think anything exonerated him, like you said, Michael, other than obviously Billy's arrangement, in my opinion, for Patz's staged suicide.
Say the same stuff over and over again on it. Like, most of the evidence was very damning against him. Like his apathetic mood, knife, fingerprint, not denying he did it to his peers, which is a huge thing. His story was all over the place. His inability to feel empathy. You know, Derek's stories about him and his just personal demeanor and vibes just was off. Just everything, really. And as far as exonerated him, outside of the suicide note, obviously, no, I don't think so. I think the jury pretty much, after Derek went up and told his side of the story, I think they had already made up the minds to the point where good old Father, whatever the hell his name was, that's when he chose to do it, because I feel like had the case continued, it would have been a clean sweep if you asked me. And that's why he did it. He pulled the trigger when he did.
Agreed. He did not pass the vibe check.
His vibes were way off.
This is true. Now, on the flip side of this, how would you have handled this situation if you were Andy? Would you make the same choices he made? Where would you differ the most?
Yikes. I honestly have no idea. As a parent, it is really hard to say because we do have such blind spots when it comes to our kids. I think, though, given all the evidence in this case and the history, I would have been more like Laurie in the sense that, like, hey, something's wrong. We need to, I feel like I would have pushed for him to be evaluated a long ass time ago. It would be really difficult to maintain any kind of blind spot, even as a parent, with all of the evidence that kind of came to light. I think initially I would probably be like Andy in the sense that, like, there's no way, and like really try to believe that. But I think as evidence came out, it would be harder and harder to maintain that belief. I would want to help my child, but also hold them accountable for their actions. So even though that would be really difficult to hold them accountable, that's what I would feel like I would want to do. And I would not murder them, holding them accountable, but like they would need to go to jail.
So I feel like I've really talked about this already. Like, I feel like I could write a freaking 20-page article on how Andy could have handled this a lot differently. So I would not have done what he did. First off, I would have told my partner about my family's history, so we would both be in the know and see the signs, so maybe we could hold each other accountable. I would, once my child did start showing or exhibiting those signs, I would have, seeked help. If I could, I know that could be expensive, but I would try something so they could better understand their feelings, or in his case, their lack thereof. I would have thought my child could do no wrong. Like, nobody's perfect. I feel like once you understand that, yes, it's obviously, I'm not a mom, so I can't speak from that, but I feel like you should realize that your kids aren't always going to be perfect, as much as you would love to see them that way. So the sooner you realize that, the sooner you can grapple with the fact that sometimes your kid's going to be a little asshole, and fix that or try to help with that instead of say, no, they did no wrong, and then they grow up to be even worse assholes. Like, that's what I would not want, So, I would have done that, I would have gotten the knife tested just for my own peace of mind. I would be like, oh, yes, son, I know you didn't do it. And then secretly behind his back be tested and be like, oh, crap. And then there we go. Or he didn't do it and be like, hey, now I tell the wife, maybe never tell the son, like, we got it tested behind your back type thing. But it's something. You would have had the peace of mind there. It would have been done. There would never been that little doubt, in the back of your head that did he not do it? I would not have gaslit my partner into thinking that she was crazy to die our child. First off, like I said, I could write a freaking novel about this. So, yeah.
So, I mean, I kind of agree with both of you on this one. I think that there are probably things that Andy did near the beginning of this that I would have probably done too as a parent. I think that, before the damning evidence comes out and before you find the knife, before all these other things happen, your kid's being accused of something, they're telling you that they didn't do it, and you believe them. And so then you're going to work your hardest to try to prove that that's right. And I think that's what Andy was doing, at least for a portion of the book of his investigation, was just trying to prove that his son was telling the truth. And I do think, though, that at a certain point, Andy takes a hard turn, and it becomes, he clearly knows the truth and doesn't want to deal with it. And I think at that point, that's when I would hope that I would react the way that we've all been talking about, that we hoped that Andy would have reacted, would have been the better reaction. And whether that means taking the knife in and having it tested, like Barbara said, or identifying these problems and finding help through a professional for this, like whether that means like a therapist or whatever it takes. But yeah, I think that the only part of Andy's journey that I could think that I might relate to is just trying to prove that my kid was telling the truth, until in proving that I proved the opposite.
I would like to preface that I wouldn't jump the gun on it. Looking at Andy's point of view, obviously he ignored all the signs. So going through that, I would have gone up to the point where the kid gets questioned by the attorney that he hired, and was like, okay, so like, why was your fingerprint there? And he was like, oh, because I did this. And then he kept questioning him, and his story was just like way off base. That's when I would be like, okay, there's something here. And then I found the knife. That would be it. I'm sorry. That's the point where I would have been like, I can't just blindly believe that my child didn't do it without going out of my way to prove that he didn't do it by testing these things. To just blindly throw the knife away and be like, no, he didn't do it. He said he didn't do it, so I'm going to believe him. I feel like that's the start of the decline for Andy in believing your child. Like, up to, obviously, you should believe your child up to a certain point, but if the evidence is pointing otherwise, like, bro, you literally said it yourself. You walk towards the evidence. You don't freaking close your eyes and hope to God it doesn't lead you off the cliff, So I just wanted to say that before people get at me and say, like, how dare you not think, you know, like, I'm not a negative person. I'm realistic. Realistically speaking, that should have been the point where little red siren should have flashed in Andy's brain and be like, this is kind of weird. Because if you're innocent, you would have been like, oh, yeah, my fingerprint was there. I rolled him over. It was kind of weird, traumatizing as F. You would have told somebody that you ran into the kid and saw a dead body. Like, the first thing isn't like, hey, I need to go wash off. Like, that's not your first inclination when you see a dead body. You call somebody. Like, the circumstances of him being there were way off base.
That is all very true. And for our final question, what did you think of the ending?
So what an ending was that, right? I love that we never got a definitive on whether Jacob did it or not. Like, would I have liked to have known? Yes, but I feel like that's what the appeal of the book was to me. That the end of the day, I had, like, it wasn't 100% proof whether he did it or not. I think it's a great way to have, like, readers debate this aspect of the mystery, because it's still unsolved technically, even though, you know, your friendly neighborhood pedophile got in trouble for it.
20 years from now, it'll be on cold case files.
Right. So I don't mind how it ended, but I would have liked to see how Andy dealt with the fact that Laurie killed Jacob, and whether she got charged for it or not, and whether Andy would cover this up. Because he clearly knows she did it, you know? I'm pretty sure she probably told him. Especially because he even said, like, he lied during his testimony against his own wife. So I just would have liked to see how they handle that as a family, and decline of poor Andy's mental state even further with the fact that that happened.
So I'm with Barbara. I really liked the ending. It was an absolute, you know, thrill ride at the end of this book as things just went from bad to worse. I like that it was a cliffhanger. I like that we didn't get an official answer. And I think that it's, like I mentioned earlier, I think that makes it a more realistic crime novel, because you don't always get, it's not like, you know, reading a Sherlock Holmes book where you get the perfect tied up ending. That's not how it works. And I think that was really interesting way to write this. And I think that made even more so by that Andy was our unreliable narrator the whole time. I do also, though, agree with Barbara that it would have been interesting to see, not necessarily to find out the truth of what happened for sure, 100%, but to see that at least the rest of Laurie's trial that we've gotten all of these, you know, little mini chapters on throughout the entire book. Andy was clearly willing to lie for his wife too, since he said some things that weren't true during that as well. But it would have been interesting to see the outcome of that, of like whether Laurie ended up in prison or whatever. That would have been a nice thing to see, at least get a little bit more of the story on. Not necessarily get it tied up with a perfect bow, but just to have a little bit more of what happened there. But otherwise, I love the ending. I thought it was a really great way to end the book.
I would like to disrespectfully disagree. I would like to respectfully disagree. I did not like the ending very much, honestly. I don't mind a cliffhanger in general, but I did feel like the whole Laurie murdering Jacob with the car accident, being dropped so close to the end, and then never being expanded upon was shitty. I wanted more closure than that. Like you said, I don't want it tied up in a little bow necessarily, but like I wanted to see how Laurie's story at least played out. Just be a little bit more, even just like 2 more chapters, just expanding on it a little bit more. I didn't need Jacob's case to be solved. Like I said, I don't mind a cliffhanger, but I just didn't like the way this one was done. But clearly that's just me.
Well, no, I think that's pretty much what I said too. Like the Jacob part, whether he did it or not, like it's fine the way they did it, but I would have liked to see, especially Laurie's like psyche and all this, because she clearly tried to commit suicide on top of murdering her son. She didn't complete it. So I'm curious to know, like, what the hell she's thinking now. Like, is she going to attempt again?
Right, because now she has to live with the guilt of what she did.
Exactly. Now she has to live with that guilt. Like, is she going to tell the truth and say, yeah, I did that on purpose. I tried to off myself too. Like, is she going to go to jail? She like herself? Is she going to incriminate herself? Like, it's all like, I would have loved to at least seen something of it. So no, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, I would say so too, for the most part.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, that's all of our questions. So let's talk about our individual scores. Barbara, what did you give this book?
A 7.
Me too. I also gave it a 7. Lauren?
6.5 because Michael needs a decimal.
I hate you
Just
so
for
much.
you.
No, I took off half because of the ending.
Yeah, that's
honestly.
fair. Yeah, that's fair. So with that, obviously our average is a 6.75, a little bit higher than that, but I did not do the specific 10 decimal math for you this time. But it's roughly a 6.75 be our group score for this one. Make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and leave us a review if they let you. It's super important. It helps us get seen by more listeners. And also, we'd love to hear feedback. Also, don't forget to be following us on social media if you're not already. Our username on both Instagram and Facebook is @BadassLitPod.
Have feedback about today's episode? Well, you can contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on Instagram or Facebook.
And with that, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you all next time. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara.
This is Lauren.
Bye.
Bye.
Stabby stab. Don't be
Stabby stab. Tanuva Malim?
Gotta love fantasy names.
Tanuva Malim is a sister of the Priory. For 50 years, she was trained to slay. Also, Michael, this coming from the person that can't pronounce the book that we read for the last history month.
Orchidea?
Yeah, Michael. Orchidea.
What did he say? Orchidea.
Orchidea.
It's not orquídea either, because that's the Portuguese pronunciation of that word, not the Spanish.
It is,
pronunciation
Michael.
of that
If
word.
you listen to the audiobook,
it's better than you butchering it.
You can hear it in the audiobook. They say orchidea. Orchidea divina. Not
Okay.
orchidea. Anyway, we can continue.
I don't want to continue now. Why am I being nice to you, Lauren? You were just brutal to me.
But we're probably going to include that part. So yeah. I figure Barbara will cut
I'm not the editor, so I don't know what's going to get included. We'll find out when the show gets posted.
I can put that.
She can put it at the end.
Yeah.
You just berated me about not being able to pronounce fantasy shit that doesn't even make any sense. It's just made up words when you can't pronounce an actual language. Anywho. So let's talk about Neologitus.
Is that how you say that?
Oh, no, it's not. It's Lejudas.
Logitus is how they said it on the Audible.
I listened to the whole audiobook that I borrowed from the library. It's Lejudas.
I am shooketh. Both of y'all listen to different audiobooks here. What WTF mate was
Lejudas.
This was the only one in the book that I did the whole neologism in my head because I did not know how to pronounce it.
It would take me a really long time to find that, but yeah, the one that I listened to was definitely Logitus because when I looked at
different recordings, I guess.
I'm sure it
didn't realize
was.
there were two. I thought there was just one recording and that's that.